The first thing we have to do is to measure the area of our pasture that you are grazing, and from then we can then see how many meters square we have per horse. So to measure the area, I'm going to use Google Maps, but you can use any other software that you are comfortable with. So firstly, I'm already at our area, so let's just go satellite so we can see easier where we are. Oops. And then when you want to start measuring in a corner of a field, just right click, select measure distance, and then you can start drawing around your area that you are actually grazing. Okay, and down here it's going to tell us the area. So the total area is 8,574 meters square, which means it's going to be over 2 acres. So per horse we would like to have at least 4,000 meters square, and this is per normal horse, so standard size horse from 15 hand and over. Now if you have a pony, smaller pony, it will depend how small it is, and how you basically judge whether your pony will eat as much as a horse. Just look at the belly size, and if the belly size is similar to a large horse in a size measurements, it's going to eat as much as a large horse. If the pony has much smaller belly, it's going to eat much less. So basically imagine filling up the belly with grass. So you want about 4,000 meters square per horse, or 1 acre per horse. If you like to work in acres, you can just easily recalculate this in acres. So 8,500, you just copy this and put meters square to acres, and then you can just plug it in and it's going to tell us how many acres we have. So it's 2.11 acres that we have. Okay, so this is number 1 step. So the next step will be how many square units we can place in, and then we can start planning up the pasture and where they are going to be located and how. Another important thing is we have to redraw your pasture on a paper so you can easily place the distances from one side to the other, so you know exactly the lengths of each side, particularly if it is not even, which I don't think many pastures are perfect squares. So for this purpose I'm using PowerPoint, but you can use any programs which allow you to place a picture and just freehand draw all around the outsides. So firstly I'm going to insert the picture, which I have basically done a screenshot of, even though in PowerPoint it allows you to bring a screenshot, but I have saved it as a picture. And now you basically draw around it with this freehand tool. Okay, and now it doesn't have to be perfect, it's going to be a bit jagged, but that's alright as long as you have the right shape of the field. So I'm drawing around. Okay, and the next thing, which is very useful, to add any points which are easy to identify in the pasture. So when you are in the pasture and you would like to remember when you are measuring the distances, for example, we have got this electricity pole, so I'm just going to draw it in. We also have a footpath going across, so I'm going to mark the footpath gateways because it's quite important where they are. We're just going to do this other gateway as well. So there's these 2 footpath gateways, and that's pretty good. So now we can basically delete this picture and we have got shape of the field. You could put, so for example, we've got houses here, we have got we have got trees here, so you can mark them in there, which will allow you then to easily identify where they are, so where you are in the field. So I've just marked the trees in there. So we can now delete the picture, and now we could just basically print this. It's up to you how you do this. So I've got the field. I've just grouped all these things, which is just select and then say group. Now I'm going to rotate it so it's much easier for me to use this field. So we go back to Google here, and we are going to measure, but this time we are measuring the distance, so you will have to do it one by one. So it's 47 meters, and just one by one add it here. 47, and delete it. So keep deleting it. I find that it's the easiest one. I'm just going to measure this one up to this footpath, 85. So I have filled up the measurements of and the distances of the field, and now I have also written what I am using per horse. So this is the grazing unit per horse, which I am using 8 times 10 meter. So it's 80 meters square. So you can sort of now get an idea how many grazing units you have per horse. Now if you have 2 horses, you need to double this. Now my grazing shape that I'm using is 8 meters wide times 20 meter long, because I've got 2 horses, so each of them has 8 times 10 next to each other. So I've got this long shape. Now the shape of your grazing unit may differ, and you may decide to have different sides. Let's say because 80 meters square, you can sort of divide in whichever way you want. It can be more square than this. It's up to you. Now you also have to consider, once you start grazing in this way, you will soon learn, but just as a little warning, you have to consider the surroundings where you are placing your grazing units, because for example, if it's very strong winds and there are lots of trees, they are flapping, the horses may not feel very safe being nearby, so you may need to have a longer one so they can get out of there and not be too close. So in my case, we have got this shape nearby the trees. Now I am separating the 2 horses, and there is some reasons for that, because one of the horses is very dominant over the other, and he can get quite aggressive. So I keep them separate, but if your horses are fine with each other, you can just keep them together. That's fine. So I'm just going to now fill it up for you, and you will see the final result. Okay, so I have just drawn around according to my paper plans, how I have measured it in a bit more detail. So I've drawn around how many grazing units I can fit in. So you can see there is quite a lot, and it's easier if you do it on a paper. So just go ahead and print your basic shape of the field, and just start measuring either in the field or in Google, and then calculating how many grazing units you can fit in. Sometimes even if you measure in Google, there is lots of like plus or minus few meters here and there, so it is a good thing to also remeasure in the field, at least few of the distances. So then when you go there to actually set up your grazing units, you will be a bit more comfortable with what you actually have, and also plan slightly less, perhaps just plan a little bit less maybe, just to have a little bit extra in case your measuring was not perfect. So this is just a basic pasture representation. Each part of the field we will be grazing in a different pattern. Now you can already like set your fences like main line already, and then just have the grazing units from there. It doesn't matter which way you do it. Now we don't have any preset lines, for example like here or here. We basically just graze each unit and moved each unit. We may change it in the future, it depends. We have only 2 horses, so it's pretty easy, and we also have other animals on the land, so it makes it much easier moving the other animals that we also have. Now what I'm going to do, you might need to somehow label each unit. For example, this unit, this unit, and this unit. So now I have labeled the field units. So now we have parts of the pastures, and I have them named A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. You can name them whatever you like. If you have larger herd of your horses, you may label each field as a grazing, within which you will have the grazing unit, so you can label it as field 1, 2, 3, 4, up to you. It can be anything that you recognize and that makes it easier for you to remember. Now this labeling system we will then be using in a planning chart. If you go over to regreentheearth.org, you can download the planning chart. It's much easier if you do this planning by hand with a pencil rather than on a computer, but I'm just showing you on the computer because it's easier. So don't be worried when you see all these lines and things, how complicated it looks. It's not complicated. All these little lines is basically days within a month, and it just gives you enough space for all of your paddocks you might have. So this is the months, and we are just going to do a plan for grazing season. So I'm just going to show you what it looks like and how to do it. So first we are just going to start from the month of March up until the month of September, end of September. Okay, so I've gone ahead and filled up the months that we are going to be planning for. So it's March, April, May, June, July, August, September. And now we are going to use our name labels of our paddocks. So it's here. So we have got, in my case, we've got A to H, but you can use any other labels that you have placed in here, how you have labeled your field. So I've just zoomed on the area and I've filled up the labels of the paddocks, A to H. Now we have number of grazing units within it. It's basically these units within it, how many we've got in there. So we just need to fill that up. And then grazing days in each. Now that is going to might differ, and I will just walk you through in a minute how we are going to determine that. And then the paddock quality 1 to 10, where 10 is the highest paddock quality, which just basically means how good quality forage there is. Forage meaning the grass, the herbs, the forbs, everything that the horse can eat. The highest quality means very tall, dense, lush grass. So that would be in the number 10. Number 1 would be very poor, basically nearly no grass, bare soil. That's basically 1. So you will be somewhere around between 5 to 10, depending on what sort of quality you are. So if you just think of the 10 is very lush, very dense, no spacing in between plants. You can see like green leaves, there is no dead stuff, there is not like lots of oxidized matter in between the plants. There is lots of lush forage throughout each space, and it's also depending on the time of year, it's tall or it's just very dense, because if you are coming just out of winter, the quality might be 30 to 50 centimeters tall, so that would be your 10. So basically number 1 would be just mud, which means here and there a few plants, but very few, so your horse wouldn't be able to eat very much. So that's number 1. If you just think of this scale, where would you place your pasture between 1 to 10? Just think of what is about middle. Middle may be that there is some space between plants, or the plants are not very tall, there is plenty of weeds. That's perhaps number 5, and then it just can increase. Number 5 or below 5 can mean that your grass is not growing very tall. We've got some areas in our pasture that are still very poor, So that's still below 5, where they are not growing very tall, where there is only like a couple of inches. We have managed to get them 10 centimeter, 20 centimeter, but they don't seem to go any higher than that. And above 5 is going to be something that your horse will enjoy, and it's going to feed the horse for quite a good time. So that's the paddock quality. So I'm just going to fill it up for you. I have marked and filled up all the information about our paddocks. So there is obviously more space for many more paddocks than we need, because we have only 2 horses. So if you've got more horses, larger areas and paddocks, you've got more space here. So for example, in paddock A, which is this one, we have got, according to this, we have got 9 grazing units. We will be grazing in each 2 to 3 days, and the quality of the paddock is 5, so it's not wonderful. There is a reason for that, because some area, half of the area is very good, half of it is quite poor. So we have got both worlds here. We will just mark in when the growth of the grass is going to start. So in our region where we are in England, we are going to start about middle of April, so somewhere here. So I'm just going to mark, so let's label it growth start. Okay, so that's when our growth starts here. Okay, so before the growth starts, we are on a winter period grazing, in which case what I'm doing with my horses is that I'm still feeding them hay, and I'm rotating at 3 days in each paddock. That is in order to allow for much longer recovery to all the other paddocks, because during non-growing season they need much longer, and I can use the feed, which is in my case hay, to fertilize the paddocks. Another thing you should consider, all of the factors that might affect where your horse is and when, or when you want your horse to be in certain areas, or when you don't want the horse to be in certain areas. And also add in when drought starts, which means that you want to be in certain areas in that time, because that areas or that paddock will be able to hold them the best. For example, we have got these 2 paddocks which have very high quality, so these paddocks will be the best to hold the horses when we are having the August drought. So we are going to mark the drought, we are going to mark when we are going on holidays. So we are assuming there's going to be some heat wave and we will need access to shade, so we will have to mark that. And you can also mark any other factors that you need to start considering in your horse management. So I've just marked all of the important factors that is going to affect our grazing regime, which is, so we've got when the growth starts, we have got my holidays, when I'm going on holidays, then the drought season, which is just planned how it usually happens in the UK. This year it was slightly different, but we still had drought in August. And then the access to shade, when it's going to be hot, more likely to be over 25 degrees, when the horses may need access to shade or some sort of a protection from the heat. If you are now going to have a look at the number of grazing units within each paddock, so I have 47 grazing units altogether, and if I said we will stay 2 days in each, that is 94 days of rest each of the unit will have. Now that is probably optimal for our purposes. Now it could be slightly less. In some cases we could drop down to 80 days or even 60 days in certain areas. However, we have certain areas, like we have got these 4, 5, 3, 2, so we've got some paddocks here with very low quality, which just take very long time to recover. So I like to give them 90 days. If you can give at least 60 days, the more you can give your pasture to recover, the better it is. But if you can give only 60 days, it's fine. But if you can give 90 days, it's even better. So the longer it is, but you can obviously watch the pasture. I would start with a bit more conservative approach and just leave more. If you can afford to leave more rest, I would leave more rest, because it's the rest that your pasture probably needs. Now when you do start, it's going to be slightly different picture. It's not going to be because you feel need a rest altogether, and now you are starting to graze through it, so it will be slightly different picture in the first 6 months. Give yourself the most rest you can. If the pasture that you are going to graze has been rested thoroughly, then you can basically start grazing according to your plan and don't need to supplement with any feed. You can also graze 1 day in each paddock. I've put 3 days just because in some areas, in this GNH, I usually do 3 days in each and just extend it. Now I'm going to be talking about the extension to the old paddocks later when we are actually in the field, and I can show you what it is. So don't be worried too much about the grazing unit, that it's not enough space for your horse to run it. We are going to be extending the grazing unit. Is a new grazing unit, as if new grass, but the horse space can extend into the old grazing units. So basically you can double the space, or I usually use either 1/2 to 1/3 of the old grazing units. That extends the new grazing unit to give the horses more space. Just depends on the weather. If it's very windy and so on, I give larger space if they need to run. If it's just like a mild day and there is tons of grass, they can have 1/3 less space. Just really depends on your horse and on the conditions. So I will fill up each paddock how I have run it. Now in this March to April I have planned, so up to March to April I have done 3 days here, and then from April I have run them in 2-day sections all the way up until end of September, and we will just see how the growth goes past that. Now I'm going to be taking into account my holidays, where I want to be in which paddock for holidays. Now the reason why I have these holidays here is because usually it's not me who is looking after the horses, so it needs to be something very easy to manage. When somebody who doesn't know much about your pasture system or horses can basically just open the gates, let them into a new area, shut the gate behind them, and that's it. So something really simple. The drought, I'm going to be using the areas with the highest growth, the highest product quality for these months, and also leading up to it. So we'll see how we get there. I have filled up all of the grazing plan, so it's this line. Now ideally you would do it with pen and pencil and some eraser, because sometimes you need to work backwards. So even though you may start your plan and you may decide, oh no, I don't want to be in this area at this time, so you just need to erase it and perhaps work from those areas where you want to be in certain times. So just work sort of backwards when you are doing your planning. So it's easiest to do it on a paper with a pencil and a rubber, so you can keep erasing until you make it right, so it all fits within your schedule and within your all the factors that you need to consider. What it also helps you to see and to calculate is the rest periods. So let's say you have got paddock quality which is very low, so in that case you need slightly longer rest. If you have got higher quality paddock, you can do with a shorter rest. So you can see it here and calculate it here. Now in some of these cases, like I think it's pasture paddock B, I have it split in 2 because 1/2 is very good, the other half is much poorer. Do make some space underneath. So once you've done your plan, stick it somewhere where you see it every day. Keep a pen nearby so you can actually place with a pen actual grazing pattern you have done, because sometimes you may find you save day here and there, or you need to move faster, in which case you will need to just mark it up. Now if you move faster, just bear in mind you will be decreasing the amount of rest you are doing in all of your paddock. So if you are worried about whether to move slower or faster, just err on the conservative side and move slower rather than faster. So if you can, you've got plenty of grass, just move slower. That grass will come useful later on anyway, because you will have the peak of the growth is between May, June, up depending on the year, middle of May to June, sometimes into July. So here you will find the most of the grass, and then it will stop growing more or less in when the drought starts, which is in our region between July and August, just depending when it stops raining and the heat wave starts. You can just grow more forage and then you will use it up in the drought times. Now what you have noticed here, these black marks, so this basically because each of the month here has got like 31 spaces, but not all months have 31 days, so that's what it basically means. So it just removes that one day to make it 30 days. So the next thing is to fill up this feed type, feed amount and feed frequency. I was feeding during the non-growing season, so which was March and April, and then I could stop feeding the rest of the year. So I'm just going to fill up what was the feed type, feed amount and feed frequency. So the next thing that is useful is this rainfall, grass growth rate curve and recovery period. Now obviously you don't know what the rainfall is going to be, so as you are going through the season, just write down roughly the monthly rainfall. It is useful to invest into one of these rainfall gauges which tell you millimeters of rain every day, so you can just mark it in the calendar on which day it rained, and then just put the monthly average or total of the rainfall that you had. Sometimes it can rain tons in one day, sometimes it is spread throughout the season. If you want, you can divide this and just write it for when it happened and just make notes about it. And then fill up the curve, so the grass growth curve. So what I basically do is I draw it as it increases up to the peak, and then how it decreases, and that is very dependent on the rainfall, so that will become useful for you in the later years, because this will now be your records of the previous seasons and how it all depended on the rainfall, which then you can use for predicting what might happen the next season. Obviously you can't predict all of the weather patterns. I just filled it up so you can see, because we've already are now in nearly end of August, so, and it's pouring at the moment, so we have got tons of rain. So, and you can see how the grass growth curve increases and is dependent on the rainfall here. Then I've filled up the recovery periods. Now you can do it whichever way you like. You could write it down somewhere in between if you like, or at the ends of these, up to you where you would like to, where it's easier for you to see it. And also because if you are replanning, it's important for you to make sure you have enough recovery periods. Now there is still 2 things left, so you can still add more things that you need to consider. For example, if you were also reseeding the pasture in certain times, you can also put here reseeding and then just place when you are reseeding it, and just make sure that you are not returning to that pasture until the seeds have established, so you may need at least 80 days of recovery there. Now just to say about this feed type and amount, I've put hay and no hay. We stopped feeding hay at this point. Now the feed amount, we were at day 1, which is when they have moved. There was no hay needed because there was plenty of grass. And day 2 and 3, 1 section for one horse and 2 section for the other horse for the night, so only once a day. So feed frequency just once a day. Before that, when we were still in the middle of the non-growing season, we were doing twice a day, and it was about 2 sections each. And in the worst of the field where there was no grass at all, sometimes we had to do 3 sections for the night. Okay, so that's just about the hay. We could stop feeding hay at this time. We had enough grass, and I think we could have stopped feeding slightly earlier, But at least, I mean, it's an investment for your field, because your horse changes the hay into manure, which fertilizes your field. So it's a good investment as well into your field. About the first 6 months, just be prepared. You might be feeding a bit more hay than you have in the past, but it's all investment. And later on, after you've done these first difficult 6 months, you will then be feeding much less, and the feed will be decreasing year on year until you may not feed hay, not at all, depending on how your land behaves. So I hope this helps. It helps you your pasture, and then we will have a look how to do in practice with fencing and keeping the horses. Thank you for watching.